Good afternoon. You are welcome to BenTV, and my name is Tunde Alabi. It's a pleasure having you on the program today. This afternoon, we're going to Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has been in the discussion for some time now. The President Mugabe, has been having a running battle with the West and a couple of other African nations. Remember recently when he visited Nigeria, he had to give bashing to some Nigerian journalists for trying to delve into some of his affairs in managing and running Zimbabwe. So this afternoon, we will be taking a look at where Zimbabwe is politically, economically, and socially, and the position of the country vis-a-vis how the West and, of course, Zimbabweans in the diaspora perceive and view what is going on in Zimbabwe. Joining me on the program today to review the situation in Zimbabwe, the political situation, the economic situation, the social situation, and the position of the diaspora, and the position of the West, and of course the position of Zimbabweans in Zimbabwe, another African nation. In the studio today is two executive directors of human rights group known as ROHR, that is Restoration Human Rights Group of Zimbabwe, ROHR. Tino and Sally. Tino, thank you for being part of the program. Sally, Tino, Sally. All right, guys, thank you for being part of the program today. Good afternoon. All right, let me start with you, Sally. Do you want to tell us briefly how Zimbabwe has come to where it is now at the moment?
Well, Tunde, the whole problem is the whole Zimbabwean situation, and as you've spoken about the socio-economic and political situation, people will be aware of. Obviously, President Mugabe is still there, sitting on the throne, and the country has had to go through turmoil since he's been on his presidency, and that is the problem that a lot of people are facing right now, especially Zimbabweans at home and here in the diaspora. The political situation is a horrible one. Election is a mockery in Zimbabwe. The election process is just ridiculous. Every time you think that the vote will change, a new president is going to be voted in, you find out that no, Mugabe is still there. And all because of vote rigging. A lot of that has been happening. The international community is not allowed to observe the voting process, which means that a lot of things are not being dealt with democratically, and it's not clear to people what is going on. Now, we know that there have been opposition parties in Zimbabwe, such as the MDC, who've opposed that, but still nothing is happening. The situation is just really a horrible one. Then you look at the social part of it, the people living in Zimbabwe. These are people who've suffered time and time again. There's no food, there's no water, there's no electricity. If it's there, it's in specific areas, not for the general public. These are human rights needs that every person should need and should have. Even education, speak of education. Children at times can't go to school because the children can't afford it, because tuition fees keep rising for no reason. Those are things that people are having to encounter in Zimbabwe. And it clearly shows that the country is being mismanaged and is continually going down the drain.
Continue going down the drain. I mean, some 20 years ago, Zimbabwe was actually being hailed as Africa's success story and dubbed the bread basket of Southern Africa because of the huge success in farming, agriculture. But everything seems to have turned the other way around. There's problem in agriculture, highly devastated. Life expectancy, especially in Zimbabwe now, is one of the lowest in the world. How are Zimbabweans living in Zimbabwe coping with the harsh situation in Zimbabwe?
You've rightfully put it across that, there has been a lot that has taken place. Since the formation of the country in its independence in 1980, this was facilitated by, in a sense, a conservative British government. And the major problem or the major backlash in terms of, the fall economically and politically came when, there was a referendum in 2001 and after it, the land reforms, or the so-called land reforms, that then took place, that this essentially was a scheme that enabled the Robert Mugabe regime and the ZANU-PF regime to remove a white minority that owned these farms, and in a sense, many of the cases, multiple farm ownership, and place their own government ministers, their own ZANU-PF supporters, to in a sense take over the agriculture. And different maybe from the previous farming regime that was there before, it has not been equally productive. And that obviously then has had negative repercussions. But in a sense...
Can I put you on hold there? If the white farmers who were managing the farm had success that made the world or other African countries to consider Zimbabwe as a food basket of the southern African region, and then things began to change for bad when Africans took over, what happened? Is it that they are less skillful, or is it mismanagement? Is it corruption? What happened? I just want to put you on hold on that issue of agriculture, because that was a very huge area of interest in Zimbabwe agriculture, and it was doing very well until this land grab policy of the government.
Part of the issue will obviously be, as you've rightfully put it, the skills shortage on managing, on actually handling the whole process of farming. Part of it is also on the mechanization. And if you really look at the third dynamic to it, is even when the farms were then transferred to the hands of the black owners, these, I believe, were people that were not really, in a sense, capable or motivated to truly farm, but it was out of political and economic motive. And as a result, you then really realize that this land reform program was a politically motivated scheme, rather than it being, an economic one and a genuine one to actually bring about change and bring about positive results.
Okay.
And the economic results also show, production. I was reading the last IMF report there. Production in farms has gone up by more than 70% just in the last decade alone. So this does show you that you've put people that are not capable, that are under-resourced, that do not have the means and the capacities to then do and maintain that same level of mechanization and farming that was there before.
Let's still talk more about this land agriculture aid, because it's been that area that actually pitched the Mugabe government against the West, the issue of land reform and white ownership to black ownership. Of what benefit so far has this been to Zimbabwe and Zimbabweans, Zimbabweans, and the ZANU-PF party of the president?
This is a program that was driven primarily by greed and political mileage.
So it's not in the best interest of the country, is that what you're saying?
I would like to categorically state that when you look at land reform in its true nature, if you look at the Asian tigers, for example, where you're saying you have a farming mechanism where at least one person or a few individuals own a sizable amount of land and is distributed in a way that is then economically and productive in a sense, that then brings the results, and that is genuine land reform. But what took place in Zimbabwe is you have one minister, like for example Ignatius Chombo, owning well over 5-10 farms, and in all those farms he's not even stationed there. He runs what they're calling the cell phone farms, where someone thinks that they can actually manage their farm at some remote location, and all they're just doing is answer a phone. So all of these accumulated will then result in this decline that we're then saying. And it then exposes what the motive behind that reform was. It was a political gimmick. It was also purely for economic greed and economic benefit to ZANU-PF.
Okay, let me cut you short again. And so let me come to you. Life expectancy in Zimbabwe since 1990 has dropped and keeps dropping. Prior 1990, it was 61 years, but now it's gone so bad that life expectancy in Zimbabwe is one of the lowest in Africa. As a woman, as a lady, and as a mother, how do you see this when there is a high level of mortality rates, low expectancy, life expectancy? How does that impact on the women, girl child, and everybody in the country?
Thank you so much for saying that. Yes, as a woman and a mother, it's shocking, to say the least. We've seen situations where cholera outbreak in 2009, so many people died from that, and because of water shortages, there were actually reports saying that the same could actually happen, in which people would die because of cholera. These are things that can be easily taken care of. Sometimes you even heard of diseases which we heard long time ago, still finding themselves there in Zimbabwe. And then you talk about medication, people cannot afford it. You talk about women going to give birth, they don't have the adequate materials, even hospitals charge them to do that. It's a woman's right to give birth naturally, you understand, to have everything she needs and be happy to see a child. But women are having to, either the child dies during pregnancy, or they don't even make it up to 3-5 years, or because of food shortages as well. All these things can be prevented. So as a mother, it's disheartening. It really is disheartening.
Are there efforts on the part of either the people? Let's look at the position of the people. People and organizations as yours, right activists. What are they doing? Do they have voice? What is the position of right activists in Zimbabwe? Let me start with you.
Yes, what we are doing right now in Zimbabwe, we've helped children. We've had initiatives and even workshops in which you get donor communities within the UK actually support, whether it's to fund children to take them to school, things like that. Those little things seem little to you, but it goes a long way to Zimbabweans because they are the ones facing it. Food shortages, we've tried to help. We have food banks here, and we try to send money and things to help children eat, even to learn properly, books, things like that. These are initiatives that ROHR is organizing here within the UK, and we have seen great results coming out of it.
How easy is it for people to be activists or express themselves in Zimbabwe now?
I really would like, before in a sense I address that issue, I really also would like to touch on this element as well, that the ZANU-PF government has in a sense shot itself in the foot. That even the donor community that you're rightfully pointing out, that it wants to improve things like life expectancy, aid, education, and all these other basic, very basic human rights to be enabled. They've set up legislation opposing non-governmental organization under some alleged, regime change agenda. Even genuine people that want to come in and assist, such as the Red Cross, that have a prolific history and strategic ties with Zimbabwe, and have worked with Zimbabwe for a long time and are doing charitable work, even as our organization is doing. We are frustrated by that regime, ensuring that all the efforts that we need to make, they either have to glorify the ZANU-PF name, or in one way or the other, all the efforts that we need to make, they must then again be tied and linked back to ZANU-PF. And in a sense then, you then realize that then this is just the basic things as providing of food. If someone and the government is not willing for you to provide food because they are afraid that once you provide that food, once you provide this shelter, once you provide all these basic things, that you are actually providing leadership and you're actually providing a name for yourself that people can identify with, how more so do you think there will be with you actually coming to demonstrate or coming up to stand for people? They will not even be tolerant. And there are countless of cases that we can give as practical examples to illustrate that, ZANU-PF is not tolerant, firstly, of criticism, nor any other, rising, genuine leadership that is taking the people's cause forward. You know, the likes of Itai Dzamara, who, as we speak now, we're celebrating his 4 months anniversary of his disappearance. Not exactly celebrating, but, you know, we are in mourning in a sense. You know, that this is a man who is standing up to the regime, telling them, you need to be accountable in how you're handling your things. But then, you know, they don't take that criticism on the chin and on board. You know, and numerous other efforts, again, as we're pointing out, are then frustrated and restricted to ensure that no one has any voice. So on the ground, it's very difficult. That's what I can really say.
On the ground, very difficult. I've got a call coming in on the show today. Thank you for being part of the program. We're taking a look at life in Zimbabwe under President Mugabe, who has been and remained one of the longest serving presidents in Africa. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Go ahead and make your point. Your name, where you're calling from?
My name is Olajuju. I'm calling from Wedding.
Okay, thank you, Olajuju. Go ahead and make your point.
Thank you very quickly. The land reform situation in South Africa happens everywhere in the world. It happens in the UK, it happens in America, it happens in South Africa, it happens everywhere in the world. The ideology is good. As Israel in Africa, the implementation at times do give us problems. That's number one. Number two, the Western policy as well. Whenever an African leader take off a traditional proper distribution of wealth among Africans, the West always kick against it. Part of the policies we have now is the issues of all the terrorism we're having all over the place. That's number one. Number two. And number three is that in terms of mechanism and agro-mechanism base, we do know that some of these African countries we do not have the technology. But whereby sanction is not being applied against you, like in the form of Zimbabwe. Yes, the man is a revolutionary. Quote me, like as what you have in Cuba now. The America has to go back to Cuba and start forming a kind of policy to become friends as well. It all happens if the Western leaders have cooperated with leaders rather than demonizing them. We will not have all the issues we have all over the world now. For example, in South Africa, it happened in South Africa. But why the issue of South Africa kind of a little bit differ from the rest of the world or from the rest of Africa is that the white people in South Africa believe that South Africa is their country. Those who cannot stay in South Africa decided to leave. But those who are ready to make sure that the countries grow, they abide with the rules and regulations and the law of the country, which is good. As the gentleman said, somebody having over 20 or 30 farms, definitely is going to take the country into ransom at any stage. But the application, when the land reform was introduced, the application as issuer and the African leaders being greedy, whether they are in the office, abusing their office, securing land, having 6 or 10 farms or places, making a remote control from somewhere where they're not here. These are the issues or areas where the government needs to look into the policy, the application of the policy, and the practice of the policies. Same thing happened in Nigeria as well. It happens all over the world, all over in Africa. But in my own issue, the application or the applying of the land reform system, it is good. It happens during Obasanjo, from NNPC to AAFP to the before that becomes to NNPC now. You understand, sir?
Yeah.
The system of distribution.
The policy is good, but the application is wrong.
Yes.
Okay.
Let me leave it to the studio.
All right, thank you so much, Olagunju. Thank you for calling into the program today. I mean, what is very disheartening, that agriculture, which has been the strength of Zimbabwe and made other African countries call Zimbabwe the food basket of the Southern Africa. Today, one of the greatest problems faces Zimbabwe is food shortages. How? I know you've spoken about this, but what is the way forward? How come did a one-time producer of food become beggars of food? Distributors of food becoming beggars of food. Zimbabwe. Tino.
If I'm really just blunt with you,
Yeah.
there needs to be a change in the thinking, not only in government, not only in institutional authorities, whether it's your judiciary, your police, and all the other systems that then help to run these things.
So now I'm going to let me tell this. I'm going to ask you, how do these organs of government function? The legislature, the judiciary, and the executive. If we're complaining about Robert Mugabe, is just an arm of government. So are we saying other arms of government are as docile or incapacitated by the mighty hand of the executive, the presidency? Let me tell this, and I'm going to come back to that question. Thank you for joining us on the program today. Your name and where you're calling from?
Oh, my name is Fungai.
Funga.
Fungai.
Oh, Fungai. Thank you for joining us, Fungai. Go ahead and make your point, Fungai.
Yeah, I'd love to agree with both two speakers, and Tino and Sally. I think what we see in Zimbabwe is terrible, to say the least. And I hear the last caller saying that the land reform in Zimbabwe was a good initiative that it was implemented badly. But I think in Zimbabwe, I want to correct that we don't have a land reform in Zimbabwe. What we have in Zimbabwe is land grab by...
land grab policy.
Yes, land grab policy by Mugabe and his people. Because Zimbabwean people didn't benefit from that. Let us also remember that when they were doing the land grab, it's not only the whites that suffered, but it's the black Zimbabweans as well. Because we've got a lot of black Zimbabweans that were kicked out of those farms to benefit the few Mugabe regime. Mugabe and his thugs, if may allow me to say it. So what we see in Zimbabwe is a sham policy by Mugabe. And Mugabe uses that propaganda, especially here, to tell the whole world that, no, this is an issue where I'm trying to get the land and give to the Zimbabweans. We are Zimbabwe. We don't have land. As long as they're not aligned with ZANU-PF, as long as you're close in the hierarchy of ZANU-PF, you don't get land. So what Mugabe is doing actually is very, very bad. And
Funga, very many people say the failure in Zimbabwe today is a result of the negative impact of the position of the West against Zimbabwe.
No, that's a lie. Because even if you look, Mugabe talks about these sanctions. These sanctions are only imposed on Mugabe and his people. This is just travel ban. So Mugabe uses that to say these are economic sanctions. These are not economic sanctions. It's only the sanctions on Mugabe and his cronies. It was a travel ban, and they use it. Right now, the EU have lifted the ban, except for himself, Mugabe, and the First Lady. So Mugabe uses this propaganda to tell the whole world that Zimbabwe is suffering because of but the truth of the matter is that Zimbabwe is suffering because of Mugabe's misrule, ZANU-PF. They're looting. These are a game of thugs who are just looting. Zimbabwe, as you rightly said, it was the breadbasket of Africa. What did? They kicked out the productive farmers out of the farms, and now the farms are given to their friends and families who just look at them, and there's no production.
All right, Funga, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your contribution on the program today. So, now the functionalities of the other arms of government, how do they work? If the presidency or the executive is failing, should the judiciary or the legislature also fail? Or what is the position? Are they also under the weight of Mugabe?
I'll give you a practical example. In our different African setups, we have a normal family setup where you have your father, your mother, and your children. Now, in that family setup, how much of a voice can children state in opposition if they're really financially, economically, culturally, and politically dependent on the head figure, the father? So you have a system of patronage in Zimbabwe where the entire judiciary system, the whole bench, is appointed by one man.
Appointed by one man, and can be sacked
by one man.
And reshuffled.
And reshuffled by one man. You have a situation where you have an executive president that determines policy on how the police operate, how the army operates, how all the other state arms operate. And all these are his fellow comrades. He puts people that are his stooges, that only dance to his tune.
That's right.
When he cracks the whip, they're the ones that move in line. And we're saying we as an organization are one of the few pro-democracy voices that are actually standing in opposition. And even when you look at other activists that are there on the ground that have tried, in a sense, to apply this independence, whether it's even be people working within the judiciary, there have been targets of massive levels of persecution through tortures, through abductions. So you then realize you have a system of patronage in which none of these so-called independent institutions are independent. Neither can they have a voice. So it's almost like you have a plane that's flying with one pilot at the cockpit, and whatever he says and whichever direction he directs that plane to, the rest of the other people are just